Good afternoon. I brought two tools for this. A mirror, a magnifying glass. This is very helpful for people who are aging. This is not. I want to tell you a little story about a mirror. I'm 80. My wife refers to me as the ageless wonder. We live on 2 square miles of country in northern New Mexico with 3 horses. We heat with wood stoves. We're completely off the grid. I have to do a lot of physical labor. I do it. For 30 plus years, 40 years maybe, I've been doing martial arts. Last year, I was still teaching martial arts. One of my students was a Navy SEAL, former #1 bull rider in the United States. He complained that this 79-year-old guy was beating him up. So I have a relatively high level of esteem for my capabilities. A few months ago, I was a motel in Gallup, New Mexico. They had a fitness center. And I went down there to exercise in the morning, and they have this whole wall of mirrors. And I made a mistake. I started doing my stretching exercises facing the mirror. And what came back was not what I thought. And the only thing was in my mind was, who is that little wizened, monkey-looking, shriveled-up human? So, looking at yourself in the mirror is helpful, but not. I mean, it's painful, but it's helpful. I realize I am not ageless. I'm aged. And I'm coming up on my used by date. And of course, the magnifying glass, you'll see as we go through this, that just looking at the surface of what the data is saying doesn't tell you what the data is saying. Alan, you want to say a couple of things? All right, let's get started. We have much more to say than you have ears to hear. And patience, but it's much more important that we reach an understanding about what we do say than that we get the opportunity to say everything we want to say. So please interrupt us at any time. It's not interrupting, it's participating. So raise your hand if you want us to explain something that we said that is absolutely unintelligible. Or if you have a different perspective, or you just want to participate. Deal? We've been, as we said, in court administration for together almost 100 years. It's hard to believe. One of the things we've always known, and this is not in the core, but it's in the core of every longtime court administrator, is that filings always go up. It's like you drop a rock, it always goes down. Filings always go up. So the consequence of this is that our workload is always going up. And we always need more resources. We need more judges. We need more staff. We need more law clerks. We need more automation. We always build courthouses too big. Why put one up if we're going to outgrow it real quickly? So we have an extra floor that hasn't been built out, or extra courtrooms, or we include space for the DA and the PD so that we can kick them out when we need the space. And our fiscal base is rooted in this notion of filings and everything always going up. So our budgets include filing fees. And it's not just our budgets, but a lot of other ancillary organizations in many places like legal aid also depend on court filing fees for their revenues. And our estimates of how many judges and staff we need are all based on weighted caseload, which all goes back to filings. The first sign that I saw that this might not be still the same is when I did a study in Los Angeles County for the county to whether they needed to increase funding for legal aid that was providing self-help centers in the 9 of the 35 courthouses in LA County. And this was in 2016. I guess the report was 2017, and it showed that the filings in the limited civil cases had dropped by half. Limited civil are 25,000 and under. So it made no sense to give legal aid more money when they had fewer cases to help people with. Nobody liked that answer. I was in Ohio doing a Justice for All project and for the Ohio Legal Aid Foundation, and just was talking with the director, and I said, this is really strange, in California filings are going down. And she said, no shit. Our revenue from filing fees has dropped by 40%. So this was not just in one place. Well, what's going on? Then came a report from the National Center for State Courts that said in the 10 years since 2007, filings of all types in courts across the United States have been going down. That graph is going down. That's below, not up. And juvenile went down 41%. Civil 60, every case type, even traffic, going down. What is going on? Water, stones don't go up, filings don't go down. So I was working with Isles at the time and went to Becky Corliss and said, let's do a study. And she said, sure. We said we'll focus on civil cases because everybody has civil cases. And mistakenly, I said, it's discretionary. You don't have to file a civil case. You have to file a family case if you're going to get a divorce or a restraining order. You have to file a felony case if you're going to get a conviction. You have to file a probate if you're going to get your estate resolved in the court. You don't have to file a civil. Yes, you do. That's what the statute of limitations is about. If you don't file that case, you lose your claim entirely. So that we made a lot of mistakes at the beginning anyway, and throughout it. So we were going to choose 4 states. We're going to look at the data going back as far as they would give us. Then once we'd analyze the data, we would have the state identify the most frequent plaintiffs and plaintiffs' lawyers, and then we talked to them so that we would understand from their perspective what was happening. Then this happened, and everything changed. And they discarded the plan for the systematic survey of the plaintiffs and their lawyers because the courts no longer had the staff to be able to do that. And Isles ultimately decided to prepare a minimum report on the data from 4 states. They're about ready to publish that. They did do the basic statistical work to show that, at least in some of these states, it is the downward trend in civil cases is statistically significant. And then they authorized Alan and me to go ahead. And we then contacted the ABA, and they said they would publish a book if we would write it. And then our friend Dan Wallace in Illinois gave us an entree to get the data from Illinois, so that added a 5th state for us. And we've been working with it since and have what, 235 pages in the can? But we still have more questions than we have answers. The first thing we had to do was choose the states. And Isles put together data from the center's annual report, which the most current was at the time 2016, and then compared it to census data to get per capita filings data. Now, it's not surprising to anybody that California has a whole lot more filings than Nevada, right? But what about per capita filings? Shouldn't that be pretty much the same from state to state when you divide the number of filings by number of people? Let's just get a show of hands. How many of you would think it's peculiar if the state next door has 50% more filings than you do? How about if they had twice as many filings per capita? That would be peculiar. That's the number. And it still takes my breath away that there is that kind of variation in a country that has more or less the same kind of people with the same law, except for Louisiana. Why would that be there? That be that level of variation? Maryland has 13,700 filings. This is all across the board, not just civil. Per 100,000 population in the state of Maryland. Tennessee, 900 per 100,000. Well, turns out Tennessee doesn't report its limited jurisdiction filings. So that you eliminate Tennessee, and now the difference is 6-1. We looked at the data for Maryland because we wanted to have a range of this per capita. And we couldn't use them because they at that time had different case management systems. They were using different data types for the same cases, so we couldn't make it work. They've now got a statewide system. They could probably do it from this day forward. But we looked hard at what Maryland was reporting in civil, and there was nothing that they were reporting that wouldn't be a case in every one of your states. So it seemed, and now that's not going into criminal and traffic and all the rest, but from everything we can ascertain, these are legitimate cases in Maryland. So that's not the answer. But let's just eliminate Maryland anyway, because it's an outlier on the other end. And at that point, the range is 4-1. Still more than most of you would have imagined. These are I've got 3 slides here that show the by state. You probably can't read it. We can look at it afterwards if you're interested. But this is the top tier, and that's all over the country. It's not regional in any way, except that the area D.C., Maryland, Virginia is uniformly high. But there's cases from New England, from the South, from the Midwest, from the far West, including Idaho and Wyoming as very high filers. We don't have data in here for Texas, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. That just wasn't in that 2016 report. These data, this is not absolutely correct data. It was rounded up to the nearest 100. So just take it with that kind of grain of salt. But that's the disparity, and it remains one of the core findings that we have for this whole study. We ended up with California, Illinois, Minnesota, Ohio, and Texas. We have 41 years of data from California, 20 years from the other 4 states. All but Minnesota end in 2019. And maybe we'll get another year from Minnesota. Alan, take it from there.
So I don't have stories as fun as John's. I live in California, very different environment from what he lives in. And I happen to live in the East Bay near Berkeley, and I have a deck that looks west, and I have thousands of pictures of the sunset from my deck because it's just so spectacular to do that. So we're coming from different places. I also don't exercise like John does. Okay, so as he said, the 5 states that we chose, we kind of chose them to be representative across the country on some level. Maryland was originally in there as our East Coast state, but as he said, we couldn't make sense of the data from their 3 case management systems. I don't know how they do it. I'm not saying they don't do it. They do it. They publish an annual report, but we couldn't get it to match. And unfortunately, one of the pandemic problems was there was really nobody to talk to for a while, for months. So we just put Maryland aside, and I'm sorry we did that, because it would be interesting to see why their numbers are so different. And we added Illinois later when they volunteered to be in, and we said, do you really understand what we're doing here? Do you want to know what's going on back as far? And they said, yeah, we'll do that. So we're good on doing that. By the time we got to this,
We actually have low per capita states except for Ohio.
yeah, we're on the lower end of that big chart, the 3 charts that John showed you. So by this time, John and I are already expecting to see a decline in filings. We kind of got over our growth thing, and I'll show you an interesting thing about the history in that. I want to caution you, so I have an engineering degree undergraduate. Numbers are nothing to me. I'm fine with numbers, piles of numbers. So you're going to see a lot of that today, and if you don't understand what's going on here, tell me. I'll try and show you what various things are. But I want to caution that even though we have a lot of data, 41 years in California of how many filings of each case type each year, when we show you something, we're going to say, this is what we saw when this happened and when this happened, or this is what the filings are when this happened. No causation. I will deny any explanation of causation. When you see it, you'll agree quickly, well, there's a whole lot of stuff going on sometimes with these. So I will say associated with, or at the same time that this happened in filings, then when this law was changed or something like that. We wanted to take a long view of filings. As I say, we asked for the states to give us as many years as possible where the case types were similar so that we wouldn't have to juggle around about changing the case categories. And we wanted to look at, okay, now we already know filings are going down. What's going on here? What other myths are there about what's going on with filings? Adjust our assumptions about what happens sometimes, and you're going to see some things here and you're going to shake your head and say, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's what the numbers say. And increase attention. I mean, when I was in Orange, I was the exec in Orange County for 8 years. The filings went down. I knew the filings went down, but I don't know that I really did anything about it or really dug into why that was the case. And in retrospect, I wish I had spent a little more time on that. The other thing is looking at what happens when legislation changes or procedural laws change, court rules change, what decisions. There are a couple of situations where it was clear that a case decision out of the Supreme Court in the state had an impact on filings. So I wanted to look at that kind of a thing. And I'm an engineer. I like to fix things. My whole point is to say, what can we do to make things better? What can we do to improve access? What can we do to improve the performance of the justice system? So I think I got more than I asked for in doing all this data, but it's really interesting. Okay, so what we got was we got the total statewide civil filings in each state, either by fiscal year or calendar year, as far back as possible, as I say, without changes in case description. So 41 years in California, 25 years in Illinois and Minnesota, 21 years in Ohio, and 16 years in Texas. So it goes back a long ways. And I'm going to talk a little, looking back is an interesting prospect. So we started collecting data in 2019 and early 2020, and we decided to stop at 2019 because the pandemic would be a whole different that's a study all by itself. So in a sense, what you see here is a baseline data from which we could look at pandemic or some other kinds of things. We use the case categories reported by the state. We didn't try and delve into it. I wish we could, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. So we're using their categories. And I don't know how many of you worked in different states. You know, the old adage, you've seen one court, you've seen one court. Well, if you've seen one state court data, you've seen one state court data. It's astonishing what the differences are across there. So there was a real limit as to how much we could analyze with our glasses going farther down. We also got from the 3 states, California, Illinois, Minnesota, data by county. And all 3 of those states, the courts are organized by county. There's a little bit I think in Texas or somewhere, but these guys, so it made it easier to compare geographically and regions of the country and adjacent counties and what the big counties look like versus small counties. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We tried to get comparable categories to the extent possible. So some of you are going to look, wait, I'm Minnesota, and I look at that number, and that doesn't quite look right. Well, that's because we probably took something out of the Minnesota data that didn't show up in anybody else's state kind of data. And that was, there's some stuff in Minnesota, some things in Texas, and we tried to make sure that it was as comparable as possible, and that's as possible is very important in doing that. We also added in Ohio, they have a Court of Claims. Any action against a state in Ohio has to be filed in the Court of Claims. Other states, you just file it in a regular court, so we added in the Court of Claims. Minnesota has a tax court, so we added those in. So we tried to make them as comparable as possible. Not an easy thing to do. The other thing, not on here, but we only looked at new cases. And a lot of states, maybe even a majority of them, when you look at their filings data in the annual report, it's not just new cases. It's cases that came back, reactivated. There's several other terms for them. We tried to stick just with the new ones, again, in order to see what's different about statutes or case law or legislation or whatever to do that. It doesn't vary that much. It's a few percentage points difference in terms of doing that. So we looked at the data from 3 perspectives. Over time, as I say, we were trying to look at what happened over the long term, because as we say, we all kind of know what happened last year, and if you look at any annual report, it says what happened last year, maybe what happened in the last 5 years. One of them even occasionally talked about 10 years. But as you'll see, none of those is really all that helpful. Sometimes you really need to look farther back to see what's going on. We looked at population. Again, to try to be comparable, we looked at filings per capita. So we divided filings by the census data per 100,000 people. And I'll show you graphs both with total filings and per capita filings, and you'll see it makes an enormous difference when you look at things. And then finally was the context, what's going on in courts, what's changing in courts in terms of legislation and other kinds of things. We also, I mean, it's a huge database. We looked at things one at a time. It was really hard to find any kind of multi-correlation kind of a thing. Oh, this and this and this, maybe that explains it. We're nowhere near being able to do that with the data we have. We're just now looking at one-off kinds of things. So sometimes there is going to be overlaps. So overall, yeah, filings have dropped over the long term from 2018 or 2019 going backward. Doesn't make anything, notwithstanding population growth, this fascinating stuff about how fast a state grows seems to have a relationship to the filings, which is odd. The variance in filings not only is at least 4 to 1, maybe higher than that across states, we have variances bigger than that within states. Huge variances sometimes, and varies year to year, and particularly across counties. Recessions, we'll touch on that. It has an effect, but not on every case type. Only certain case types seem to go up and down during the major impact. Cases with lawyers, the big cases, it actually doesn't fluctuate very much. I think there's a capacity thing going on here. We can only handle so many big cases. Even if there's a recession or something else, we can still only handle so many big cases. And those don't fluctuate as much, and they don't go up and down the same way. Disappointing to me, because I spent a lot of my career improving case flow management things. It doesn't have as much impact as you wish it would on filing levels. So an interesting thing about that, and I recently, John and I haven't even talked about this. So if you tried to compare us to a business, wouldn't we be out there trying to get as many filings as possible? I mean, a car company wants to sell as many new cars as possible. We don't do that. We don't even think of doing that. And now when we look back, we realize we've been losing business over the years. It's a very different perspective than we have. So a few things that are kind of obvious that were surprising, and admitting that we only have 5 states, so it's limited. Just because you have more people doesn't mean you have more total filings. California is the biggest state, 6th largest economy in the world. That doesn't mean they have a lot more, that proportionally more filings than some other state. Just not true. Per capita filing levels vary within a state. As I say, it can vary 4 or 5 to 1, 6 or 8 to 1 on certain kinds of things. Very different. Geographically adjacent counties. So I'm from Orange County. I worked in Orange County. San Diego County is right next door. We share a huge border. Both of us had a little over 3 million population, and there's no comparison at all in the filing levels. Very different filing levels between Orange and San Diego. Similar with a couple other states that we looked at and a couple other jurisdictions. So here's a couple quick things on changes. So you change a jurisdictional level, you raise your small claims from 5,000 to 10,000. That's doubling the level. You'd think your filings would go up. They don't even, sometimes it doesn't go up at all. They certainly don't double when you change the jurisdictional limit. That was a surprise on that level. Does trial court organization make a difference? 3 of our courts are unified. 2 of them are classic limited general jurisdiction courts. You can't tell any difference in these 5 states. How you elect judges. Some are elected, some are appointed, but retained elections, again, you can't see any difference across the filing levels based on that. And I thought those might show something. You change the statute of limitations, you do get a change in filings. One of our states went from 1 year to 2 year. It showed up in the filings. Another, Minnesota limited they called it hip pocket filing. They capped it at a year. That you can see in the filing level, but not as much as you would have thought, and often very short term. And then the thing that kind of got me was, so technologically, when I left Orange, we were completely electronic. There was no paper in the entire system. Judges were working off monitors. Everything was in a computer, and San Diego wasn't. They were partway there. Again, you can't see the difference in the filings. The technology is not as beneficial as one might think it would be. Okay, things we couldn't look at yet. Number of lawyers in the state. Issues about tort reform. Tort cases are actually a minor part of the caseload. And we kind of focused on the bigger categories of things. Debt buying, the whole debt thing, there's a little bit of stuff there, but there's a lot of stuff going on there that we just weren't able to analyze. And some of the civil procedure law differences, differences in discovery, pleading requirements, proof requirements, we didn't have enough time and information to do all that. Impact of ADR. The problem with ADR is you don't know how many cases are in ADR. If it's pre-filing, you don't know. And the ADR people don't report statistics. So it's hard to know whether ADR has any impact at all. We were going to talk to lawyers about their policies about litigation. We didn't have time for that because of the pandemic and some other stuff. The amount of filing fees. We haven't compared states about filing fees. And John and I don't always agree on this, but we didn't have a chance to look at that. We did actually, finally, you'll see some stuff on federal diversity. And then it's not just pandemics. Florida has these wind blows through every once in a while, knocks things down. And in California, we just burn everything down. So there wasn't much chance to look at that kind of stuff. Okay, time to fasten your seatbelts. We're getting into some data here. So this is total filings over time. Just civil filings as comparable as we could make them. 41 years in California, and then, as I say, lesser time in the other ones. So, yeah, real consistent, right? Not, you see a few things, how does this work? These things that we'll talk about. This is the Great Recession. So clearly there's an impact from the Great Recession. This one is the dot-com recession. Okay, it makes more sense in California because that's basically where we started all these businesses and they quit them. But it doesn't show up in the same way in the other states. California peaked way back. It's been going down ever since. But now convert it to per capita, and suddenly you start seeing some patterns here. The lower three are the Texas, Minnesota, and California have very similar per capita filing levels. In Illinois and Ohio, there again, look at the spread between Ohio's the top gray line and the other three. That requires a lot of explanation, and we don't have that much to share with you today because that's the first time we saw anything with that much difference in it. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the peaks that are on there. So how far back you look makes a difference. As I said earlier, some reports show what affected last year, what was it 2 years ago, what was it 5 years ago, what was it 10 years ago. But look at the differences in how far back you look. The first column is total filings, second one is per capita filings. And I think the big thing here is looking at this since the peak filing level. Total filings peaked in California in 91, 92, and they're down 40% since then. Per capita filings, 10 years earlier, per capita filings peaked in California. And now it's down almost 60% from the height back in 81, 82. I was actually around through all that time period, and I wasn't quite aware of all that stuff. And I'm glad I didn't, because I probably would have freaked out about what they were going to do to our budget if they saw this kind of a number going on. Now, the drop in California, during that same 40-year period where you had the total 40 years, the California population increased 70%. Huge increase in population. And I think we kind of assumed if there was an increase in population, there was an increase in filings. Yeah, more people file. Not so. A different kind of a thing. This is interesting. So in 1980, 81, this chart on this side was from a futures commission that was done in California. It was called Futures 2020, and they were kind of predicting what the courts ought to look like in 2020. Don't read it. It's depressing. But if you look from about here up is the same as here on the graph of the 41 years that we had. The numbers, the scale is the same, but the number's a little lower because back in those days they counted a bunch of civil petitions, particularly family law petitions, with their civil. So we don't count those. But the shape of the curve here is the same dip there, and then it rises up here. They stopped basically at the peak. So up to that point, everything was going up. Looked good. Well, not since then. And I think this was one of the really startling things when we looked at they did note, this is total filings, they did note in the report that it was per capita filings weren't going up the same speed, but they didn't realize that per capita filings had actually peaked way back here. That was really the peak going forward. I mean, they knew there was a peak there, but they didn't know that was going to be it for the longest time. Also, fluctuations year to year, huge variations year to year in filings. As I say, there are some years where the filings go up 15 or 20% from the last year, and other times when it goes down as much as 15% in the 5 states. So as I say, it wreaks havoc on budgeting. No legislature is going to give you 20% more judges or 20% more budget because your filings go up 20%. And this is a statewide basis. It certainly isn't happening on a statewide basis. So it makes a mess of your, so what, the weighted caseload said I need 10 more judges. I'm not going to get 10 more judges. Never happened. Plus it takes years to go through the process and then get people appointed and everything. And when the peaks and valleys occurred was not the same in the 5 years. Or in the 5 states across there. So a quick look at one state, this is Ohio. Here you're going back 20-some years, 1999. Each one of those is a different case type. So this is where you get this guy out and start looking at so the filings in Ohio, remember that gray line that went up way high on one of those earlier graphs? Well, it's all contract cases in the municipal courts and county courts. Well, that's really relevant to case management. If your increase is all contract cases, do you even know that? Are you doing anything differently? Are your judges doing anything differently? Are you telling them to do something differently? Because, look, the influx here is contract cases. Now, you look down at the bottom here, the bottom lines are, down here are the tort cases. They're not doing anything. And I'll bet you the bulk of your judges are handling these cases or want to handle these cases. I know my judges always wanted to get to the big civil cases. That was their height of their career, you know. But it's not. So here in Ohio, the foreclosures peaked. But they peaked at a different time from the contract cases. So I think you really need to be able to get down into the detail about if you're getting an increase or decrease in filings, where's it coming from? Now I think this is important, and I wish I'd paid more attention when I was in Orange. The lower value cases, under 25,000 in California and under 50,000 in Illinois, are the bulk of our caseloads now. The top is 100%, so they're already getting up over 50%. In some court in Ohio, those are limited jurisdiction, municipal and county courts. In California and the other states, they're all in the same court because they only have one court in each state. But are you spending the bulk of your time with the bulk of the cases? I doubt it. I doubt you even knew that. And I doubt your judges know that. So that's, I think, something that's really important that gets to the filings. Okay, here's the one thing that really surprised us. If you look at population growth, so in this time period, California grew from just, I didn't go all the way back, it's a shorter time frame to look at all the states. Texas grew 56%, California grew 25%, Minnesota grew 23%, and those are all the low states on the per capita filing. The slow growing states population-wise, Ohio was 5%, Illinois was 6%. They have higher per capita filings. Okay, it's 5 states, not 50, but that's one of the most clear distinctions that we saw in all this data, and I have no idea why. You know, is it people in fast-growing states, the culture is different, the local legal culture about filing is different? I don't know, but that was a fascinating thing. Big courts. Everybody loves big courts. Big courts have automation. Everybody looks at big courts. This is a chart. Each one of those dots is a court with over 1 million people population in it. There's 14 of them in the 5 states. On the far side is the state average. So that's Ohio, Texas, Minnesota, Illinois, and California on the state per capita filing level. So our friends here, this is LA. It's above the state average, but there's 3 other courts in California. They're below the state average that are also large courts. And remember I talked, this is Orange County, that one's San Diego County. Same size court, right next to each other, completely different per capita filing levels. The biggest one is Cuyahoga, Cleveland. In a slow-growing state, it's actually shrunk in population. And the one here in the bottom is Orange, moderately fast-growing population. But, you know, it's a huge court, 3 million people in there. So you can see I highlighted where the biggest court in each of the states is on the chart. You know, this is one of the charts. So my wife's a school teacher, grade school teacher. I pick up the chart and I show her the chart and I say, what do you see in this chart? And she looks at me and she looks at the chart and she looks at me and she looks at the chart. And she says, I don't see anything. And I said, that's exactly the point. There's no consistency among size of population and the per capita filing levels, even within states, let alone across states. So now we're getting to another one. Here's what happens during the recessions. As I said, the first one over here is the dot-com recession in 2000, and this is the big one. The definitions are used the federal NIBR's definition of what a recession is. It's 2 consecutive quarters, plus they think it is, that it's gone down, and that's a recession. Well, clearly, something was going on before the actual declaration there of the recession. Stuff was going up in the different states before that. And that was an interesting, so again, this is the overview level. Now you got to get the glasses out to see what's going on down inside some of these kind of things. So what categories of cases surged during the recession when we got the magnifying glass out? Not a lot of detail because the categories are not good sometimes, but it looked clearly lower value cases. California only counts one category of lower value cases, but they were clearly the ones that had the surge during the recession. Contract cases, and then debt collection is obviously a subset of contract. We had data that shows it was one of the things that went up in Ohio, Minnesota, and Texas. We don't know in California and Illinois because they don't count in a way that helps that. Same with landlord-tenant. Minnesota, there was some of that, although I think in Minnesota, and I don't know, you got a lot of Minnesota people here, it seemed to me from the county level data that most of the landlord-tenant stuff was around the Twin Cities, not out in the hinterlands, which that threw me. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's the kind of, we were talking about, what's the housing situation in smaller counties versus in the big cities, the urban areas. Foreclosures, I would have thought this was in there. It's not really. It's interesting. I have a friend who was a mortgage banker for years, and he explained to me that when you shifted from what's the movie at Christmas time with the classic story about the local mortgage bank and they can't find the money and the guy's thinking of jumping off the bridge. I can't remember the name of it now. That is not how mortgages work these days. You have mortgage brokers out there who sell you mortgages and they make money on the sale of the mortgage. They don't want anything to do with that mortgage. They immediately sell it to some processing agency, and then the banker guys package them up, and that's what crashed in the '08 recession, was all those packaged up mortgage situations. Well, when 1,000 people in Europe own bonds that are a collection of mortgages, they're not going to default on one particular mortgage in a local state. So I think the reason the mortgage foreclosure thing didn't happen, that you don't have the same bulge, is that whole business has shifted in a way that you're not going to get a lot of mortgage filings. People settle, there's loan things. People in California, we had a lot of that. People just literally emptied their stuff out of their house, put the keys in the mailbox and drove off. So what's the bank going to do in that situation? They sell the house they get a default deed that's allowed in the mortgage. They don't even have to go to court, and they sell the house and get something back. So that's completely changed, but I don't have enough data, and I don't understand mortgages until I talk to my friend about that. Tort cases, that's not a big deal in recessions. And small claims didn't surge during recessions, except in Illinois, oddly enough, whatever that was. But the problem is you can't say much more than this because you don't have enough detail in the case types. And that's really something that I'm going to talk about later on about doing it. Are you talking about this guy? Are you talking this one? Yeah.
We're 10 minutes behind.
Oh, okay.
Just a couple of words about statute of limitations and increases in jurisdictional limit that we've always thought would cause increases or decreases in filings. And this is two jurisdictional amount increases in California. The first one was a trebling of the limited civil filing threshold, and you saw that it did go up. The blue went up quite a bit right away, but the red, which was the unlimited, was not affected. So there were more when the jurisdictional limit was increased, but it didn't bring any of the other cases in. And then it didn't keep going up. It leveled off, and you can see the next one came along. It didn't make any difference at all. And this is the same thing in small claims courts. And what this chart really shows is that every time the small claims limit goes up, the percentage of small claims, as all civil cases, goes down. And at the very bottom is when the jurisdictional limit is, get the right eye on this, 10K, 10K, 15K, 6K, 10K, the percentage of small claims, 18, 39, 40, 9%, 7%, has no relationship whatsoever, the jurisdictional limit from state to state and the number of filings. Alan? When we get to the small claims, let's just go through that.
So we looked at the changes in case management programs. And I'm just going to talk about two of them here. Way back in the 80s, California had something called the Economical Litigation Project, which simplified what went on in very small cases, the limited civil cases that happened. There had been a drop in the filings, and it just slowed, but it kept dropping. It didn't make that much difference on filings. Then we had this huge Trial Court Delay Reduction Act in California that applied to all the Superior Court cases. Eventually, it started out as a pilot and then moved to everything. Weird thing there happened is the total filings for the high-value cases, which were really what it was directed at, continued to decline. It wasn't like, oh, it's easier now, so we'll have more filings of high-value cases. It didn't happen. But the weird part was the mid-range cases. You would have thought if it was dropping on one, the other one would go up because there's jurisdictional limit. Either you're above it or below it, and that's what court it is. We found as much as a third of the caseload just disappeared when the Trial Court Delay Reduction Program happened. And it's the cases, I don't know, between 5,000 and 25,000 ballpark. The mid-range cases, it wasn't apparently economical for the lawyers and people to prosecute them, so they just disappeared. They weren't filed. That's depressing. That's not what the point of the delay reduction program was. The court organization, so as I said, three of these courts are single court in each county handling everything. Two of them are classic upper, lower kind of courts kind of thing. Solid line is the courts that are, you still have a two-tier court system. Dotted line is the unified court system. No pattern. It's not clear. I mean, the growth thing made more difference than this did on what's going on. Here's what happened during consolidation in California, the gray area. It was the pilot courts, and then they finally said everybody's got to do it, but the judges all had to agree in the two different courts. I think the same thing happened in Minnesota. Okay, getting 50 judges in one court and 50 judges in the other court to agree to merge to a different kind of court. It took a little while. But as you can see, the total filing one on the top, it actually dipped and then went up a little bit afterwards. The unlimited civil, the big cases, pretty much unchanged. The small claims cases, dropping. They've been dropping for 40 years. They're still dropping. Didn't make any difference. And the limited civil went down again. And that's why this went down, was because limited civil went down really, and then rebounded a little bit, but didn't make that much difference. So again, it's not so clear that a kind of a new way of organizing things makes a lot of difference. I'm going to go through quicker on the small claims because of the time thing here. This was the most surprising and, to me, depressing part of the whole thing, is small claims filings, they're just going down in all four of the 5 states. Doesn't make any difference if you double the jurisdictional cap. One of them was a 250% increase. Still didn't have much impact on the filing levels per capita in that sense. And then the bigger thing was all these things we've done to help people. This is the total filings, small claims. Greens, Illinois, that's the only one that's higher. This little bump in Texas is because they moved a bunch of cases from justice court to small claims court. It wasn't an increase in filings of small claims necessarily. This is the per capita thing. Notice that basically all these levels here are below the levels they started at, except for Illinois. Over 25 years. Here's going from 96 to 2018. Per capita filings down 72% in California, 49% in Minnesota, 52% in Ohio. Those are substantial drops in case filings per capita. The Illinois one was thinking, again, this is where you need your little magnifying glass. So if you looked at just the top line, that's the whole state. You go, oh, it went up and down and then it had a little peak. Well, when you sort it out, this is the rural counties or the non-Chicago counties. The green is the lines around Cook County and red is Cook County. Now, I need to get somebody from Illinois at some point to explain to me what happened in Cook County that the small claims filings went up like, I don't know what it is. But if you'd looked at this, you would have thought, okay, something happened here that went statewide. No, it's only one county that had that impact on doing that. Small claims as a percent of all cases, it's nothing. I mean, it's 7% in Texas. And it started out much higher in different places. So these are all the things we did. We started providing information about the court processes for small claims because people don't understand it. A lot of states have standardized the forms, not as many as should, and not all the forms that need to be standardized, but doing that. We've made them fillable, savable, PDFs, we e-file them. We even had a thing in Orange County, you fill out the form at a class and e-file it at the end of the class. Guided interviews, online interviews to complete the forms, lots of websites with information, and some courts are reviewing. You can bring in a complaint and show it to somebody and they'll review it and help you improve it. If it's not there, okay. Classes, one-on-one, all these different things we did doesn't appear to have much impact. That's depressing. We spent a lot of energy on all this stuff. We're not sure what's going on with this. The arbitration clauses, maybe in fine print, have cut down on cases. I think the vendor return policies clearly can make a difference. You're not fighting with a vendor about something that is broken. You just send it back. But it's still hard to figure. It still is hard to figure out how to file and prosecute a small claims case according to the interviews and the people that are talking to the self-represented litigants. Some people don't know they can sue in small claims court, and then other people say, "It's not going to happen. Why bother to do that?" And that may have changed a little bit. So, the federal stuff.
We've been talking about state. What about the federal courts? Well, this is consumer bankruptcies. That looks really weird. But this right here was the Bankruptcy Reform Act, where Congress made it much harder to get a Chapter 7. You had to go through a means test, and you were more likely to end up in a 13 where you had to pay it all back over time. So what this reflects is a effort by the bankruptcy lawyers to get all their cases filed before the act came into play. And then they had filed them all, so they didn't have any more to file here, and the filings were pressed down by those additional requirements. But then it gradually went back up and peaked here in about 12 or 13 and has started to fall, and this was 21. The current data is that consumer bankruptcies are becoming an endangered species. They are now down at this level right here. Right here at the peak, the recent peak was about a million cases. They're now down at a quarter of that, less than 250,000 consumer bankruptcies. U.S. District Court diversity jurisdiction. There are two types of federal civil cases. One is a case under federal law. A diversity case is one that is a state case that can be filed in federal court because the two parties are in different states. Or they can be removed from from state court into federal court. So these filings don't show the same trend as the state court filings. This is up through 2019. The federal filings are going up and down, but gradually they're going up. But since then, and this is shown in the report of the Chief Justice just filed, they have gone down by 37% since 2022. And that's excluding a whole scad of, did you ever hear about this earplug cases? There are all these product liability filings about earplugs. They're all in one federal court, they're consolidated, but they're not a class action. But if you take those out, filings are down by almost 40% in the federal courts. So this is not just limited to state courts. This is another really interesting thing. This is data from a presentation that Vice Chief Justice Timmer from the state of Arizona gave at an LSC conference in Phoenix 2 weeks ago. Over the past 30 years, the lawyers serving as corporate in-house counsel has gone up by 200%. But the numbers in firms have gone up by 30%. The number in government have gone up by 49%. When you look at between 2007 to 2012, what is the source of income for lawyers? From business, it's risen from 66 to 71%. From ordinary people, from 29%, it's fallen to 24%. And government and nonprofit have stayed the same. So the overall picture here is that the legal profession is moving ever more to be representing capital rather than capita. Business, corporations, and not people. And that's consistent with this overall trend. That doesn't mean cause, as Alan has said, but they seem to be happening together.
So what's going on here? As we know, to some extent, the public trust and confidence is down. How does this explain part of what we're seeing with the filings? What's how do you connect the dots, so to speak, between what we see in the filings and how people are feeling about things? And I don't know, the latest National Center survey about public trust and confidence, the state court in 10 years went from 67% saying they have a great deal or some confidence in what we're doing down to 60%. Now, we're still above the state government and the legislature, but not by much. And that's a huge drop in a 10-year period. There are also information about courts. And this one kind of threw me, and at first it was because of what I saw in Texas, which turned out not to be the case. I thought, wow, Texas did a lot of stuff when they changed their small claim jurisdiction in 2013, something like that. I thought, wow, maybe the fact that they made a lot of publicity about this and a lot of people talked about it and they had some commissions and everything, that more people knew about it, and that's what affected the filings. No, that wasn't it. But it made me realize that we do a terrible job of telling people what we do and how it works and how it can be. And when the jurisdiction goes up, we just doubled the jurisdiction of small claims court from 5,000 to 10,000. Did we announce that to people? Did we tell people, look, it's easier now? Maybe we recognize that the number hadn't changed for years and maybe people weren't filing because the number was too low. Well, now it's higher. So come file cases with us, like we do that kind of sales pitch. I think we need to look at doing more of that kind of thing so that people know what's going on in the court system and what's going on. I use the term bad information. There's a report that the COSTA just put out sure I have the right title for it. Well, I don't see it right away. The Casca just put out a report about court information or communication by courts. And if you go to the Casca website on the National Center, you'll see it because they just put it out there. They really make a point of saying we need to deal with misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation about our courts. And I think that's dealing with one problem that we have with communicating, but I think we also need to tell people, look, the reason we're here is if you got a dispute, we'll help you settle that dispute in a fair manner, the way Justice O'Connor described it in the first presentation this morning. So this is my favorite cartoon when dealing with data and analysis. Policeman's asking the guy, where'd you lose your wallet? And he said, well, I lost it out in the park. But I'm looking here because this is where the light is. That says it all to me about what we do. We're looking where the light is. We're looking at the case categories that we've been using for years. We're not looking back very far time-wise. So how are we going to know what's going on in our system and how well it's working? So my recommendation is we got to look, in order to know whether there's an impact and how effective new laws are and rules of court changes and that kind of stuff, you got to have the data to be able to look at that. And to be able to look at that, we need data that's, this level, not high level kind of stuff. And then the need for resources and staffing. So John and I have gone back and forth. I have done weighted caseload studies. I think the first one I did was in the 80s. And I was involved with California when we put together something called WAFM, workload allocation formula methodology for allocating money. I regret every minute I spent on that stuff. It was a complete waste of time, in my opinion. The legislature never gave us 100% of what we said. They never gave us 100% of the judges we said were needed. And all the data we were using was at least a year old in terms of the filings. So we're saying right now we need 10 more judges because what happened last year. And never mind that we needed 15 more judges 2 years ago, but last year we only needed 10. We'll say 10 for now, I think we really have to look at that whole issue of how we allocate resources and using filings to do that. And if you're going to use filings, let's use filing numbers that are relevant to what we need in terms of resources and how we're doing case management kind of stuff. John talked about filing fees. If your filings are going down, your fees are going down, you're not going to get as much money. I think it varies from state to state how much of the court budget is filing fee money. It's smaller in California because we finally convinced the legislature that that's not it, and you're not going to raise the filing fee anyway. So if we have to keep doing things and our costs are going up, you got to give us more money if you're not going to raise the filing fee. And it sort of works. They do give us more money, but that's an issue. I talked about weighted caseload.
Can I add into that?
Yeah, go ahead.
On the weighted caseload, I worked with California to help them try to interpret the results of their most recent staff level weighted caseload analysis. This was maybe 10 years ago. And they had disparity from court to court that they could not understand. And it was 30-1 was the disparity. The same task in the same case type was taking 30 minutes in one court and 1 minute in another court. And we went and checked it out, talked to them. We're convinced that they were reporting what they were doing correctly, and there was absolutely no understanding in almost every case why there was such a disparity. There was one exception to that. In one court, a judge had been overturned on appeal because the record did not show that all of the waivers had been asked and obtained for a plea. From that moment on, the minutes for every one of those plea bargains were 3 times as long in that court. And it took staff that much more time to prepare the minutes. That one we could explain, but the others we could not explain. The most recent California judicial case weights analysis took place after all these filings declines. So if the case weight is the total amount of judicial time spent divided by the number of cases, and the number of cases goes down, what happens to the case weight? It has to go up. And how do you explain to whoever is reading this why it went up? Because our filings went down? No. California was able to put together a maybe credible case that the amount of judicial work went up because of means testing. That now every bail decision, every criminal fine, every child support decision had to come with a means test, and that increased, and they had some others. But if we're going to keep using this kind of an analysis in a time of ever-dropping filings, somebody's going to call us on it, and they'll be right to call us on it. So we need to get out ahead of that and find a different way. In New Mexico, right now, the legislature is considering a bill to eliminate all filing fees in civil cases. The New Mexico Supreme Court is strongly supporting that legislation. Interesting.
So the thing about big courts, and I'll be nice to the National Center and stuff, based on what I saw in this study, don't use big courts to predict caseload. You have no idea what that means. I mean, there is that scattered Graham showed, they're all over the place, the big courts. So if you use the big court to predict things, or you look at the 25 largest courts in the country, you're looking at the 25 largest courts in the country, not what the filings are for the country as a whole. It's really problematic to do that. All right, case category terminology. I'm going to describe some of the case categories we have, and I wonder how many of you, raise your hand if you understand any of these, okay? And both John and I went to law school, and we didn't know what some of these things were. So how can people understand what we're doing if they can't even understand how we describe things? And some of my favorite ones here. Detinue, distress for rent, ejectment, escheat, even habeas corpus, lis pendens, mitimus, my favorite one, neo exeat. I don't know that I ever figured out what that one was. Quo warranto, replevin, trover, torrens. Minnesota has a land system that's called torrens. I had to go look it up and had to ask the lawyer what that explained. It actually was a judge, a friend of mine. Torts. What does tort mean to most people? So in my writing about the report, and John and I probably still have some discussions about this, I call it injury damage, not tort, because I'm trying to explain to people what's going on here and what's involved in doing that. Okay, lastly, auditing cases. We took the filings that people gave us at face value. We had no way to audit the filings. I have no idea if those filings are accurate. I do know that one time in Orange, we audited our stuff and were a little bit surprised about how inaccurate, and it mostly was things kind of drift, and somebody doesn't get quite the right training about how to categorize cases and stuff. So I think we need to move to, and I've actually been talking to some of the vendors here about a system that will read complaints and determine the case type, so that your clerks don't have to do that, and that we can get more detail about what's going on in those cases to manage stuff going on. What's the last one here? I think it's the bad information. I did find the COSCA, it's called Courting Public Trust and Confidence, Effective Communication in the Digital Age. So you didn't get a chance to write all that down, but as I say, go to the COSCA page, you'll find the report. It's one of the first, it's very good report. Publicizing things, and we still got to figure out what we're doing with self-represented litigants. We've done a lot of stuff. I'm fine with what we've done about fillable forms and the interviewing and all that kind of stuff, but we still haven't cracked the nut on how to get self-represented litigants help such that they'll file cases with us, and we can sell more cars. We can have more filings, which means more people are getting access to the justice system. Okay, we got to stop. We took too much time already. But we have a few minutes if people have questions or comments or observations or,
To you.
yeah.
Did we get any thing over the wire? Okay.
One 100%. As someone who's been trying to evangelize the use of technology to solve a lot of problems in the court, including the access to justice issue, I've gone out and looked for a lot of this same data. You know, we report case volumes, but we have now 86% of the country now e-filing, either in a permissive or mandatory. Go find me the statistics of how many of those case volumes were electronically filed. It simply does not exist. We do not report it. ODR, right? How many experiments had we had with ODR and ADR and all of these approaches? Where is that data? We don't have any of that data. So we talk about managing, but we're not collecting the data that we need to manage, right? How do you manage without data? So one point on that. What we really need to do is be able to predict the data that we need in 10 years, right? No one's ever going to do that. The best we can do is look back and try to extract the data from the data we already have. And one way to do that is to put it all in like statewide data warehouses and use some of the newer technologies. I don't want to get into AI and stuff, but you can extract a lot of that data out of the old records if we need them. And that might be the best we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the notion of predicting filings, I think probably the engineer in the back of my mind said, oh, it'd be great if we could kind of look at something that would allow us to predict filings. I told that guy to sit down. We're not even close to being able to do any kind of prediction based on what we've seen so far.
So I have a question. I'm not sure this is on. What are your thoughts about past efforts for data standardization and definitional consistency? I know at least one of you has spent immense time on that. Have we been wasting time?
The best thing we have done is NODs, the National Center's data definitions for standard case management data. But damn, it's hard. And there are just so many variations from state to state, but equally within states of what things are called. And our biggest problem is our unwillingness to address that. That our ability to call something what we want to call it is a basic American right. And I will support it with my AR-15 if I need to.
I think part of what we were talking about in terms of data, my thing is to end run the issue of standardization and say, let's get some tools that could read a complaint and tell us what's in there in a standardized way, and we'll do the standardizing in the tool that reads the complaint and use that information to go forward. Because I probably went through a dozen states trying to match up the case types, and the center has driven themselves crazy trying to do that on their thing. It is almost impossible to do that on any kind of a level. And so, as I say, my thing is let's just do it completely differently, some other way. And not just young people can be disruptive, old people can be disruptive.
Okay, our time is up here, but I want to remind you to rate this session in your app. There's a separate rating for the session and the speakers, each speaker. So please take the time to do that, and thank you for giving us your experience and knowledge around this.